Dr. Hamit Bozarslan is a Kurdish political sociologist and historian specializing in the political history of the Middle East. He's a director and professor at the School for Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences in Paris. Among his notable works are studies on political violence in Turkey, the sociology of the PKK, and analysis of the Middle Eastern uprising and authoritarian resilience. Our today panel will be held in three sections. Dr. Vali and Dr. Bozarslan share with us their topics within 20 minutes each. And then we have a 20-minute discussion, and then we'll have a 20 minutes Q&A by audience and speakers. Before we get started, bear with me to go over a brief introduction of Kurds and Kurdish question, somewhat chronologically for about 10 to 12 minutes. There's a general question, who are Kurds? This is a very general question and maybe assumed unnecessary question to explain, but simultaneously an important one. The significance comes from the fact that stateless and oppressed people are not recognized even in studies and research. And this intensified when they were subjected to assimilation projects to be eroded and subordinated to the established nationalist project. Today, the Kurdish population is estimated to be more than 45 million living in the Middle East and the diaspora. Geographically, Kurdistan, where Kurds have lived for centuries and which is called their homeland, is a liminal space divided among four countries. They're located in southeastern Turkey, northern Iraq, western and northwestern Iran, and northern Syria. So making it internationally colonized. Excuse me. So what is called the Kurdish question is not a new national liberation movement, nor confined to a finished historical moment as merely a regional conflict, but a deep-rooted transnational issue that has evolved across centuries and empires, shaped by fragmentation, resistance, reinvention, and has been revived until now. A decisive historical, or probably the first turning point, came after the Battle of Chaldiran in 16th century. Following the Ottoman victory over the Safavid, most Kurdish principalities were incorporated into the Ottoman Empire. Kurdish chiefs acknowledged Ottoman sovereignty in exchange for local autonomy. This arrangement produced a long-standing dual dynamic, fragmentation and unity simultaneously. Kurdish lands were divided between Ottoman and Iranian rule, yet cross-border relation remained fluid. The intensified centralization project of the Ottoman Empire in the late 19th century produced national liberation movements across the empire, including the Kurds. The Sheikh Obeidullah revolt of 1880 was considered the first transnational Kurdish political movement. Another true rupture in Kurdish history arrived after the World War I, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed. So the Kurdish territories were divided among three states. This partition had far more disruptive consequences than earlier Ottoman-Iranian division. While Kurds were forced to be integrated and subjected to violent conditions, the national consciousness intensified. The 1920 and 1930 witnessed multiple revolts. This uprising mobilized substantial segments of Kurdish society, but failed to reverse the imposed state boundaries. Exiled intellectuals in Syria and Lebanon organized national activity, including the formation of Khoibun in 1927 and the Ararat Rebellion. In Iran, the Kurdistan Democratic Party of Iran established the Mahabad Republic in 1946 under Soviet occupation, but Iranian forces dismantled it within a year. After the World War II, Kurdish movement entered a new phase. In Iraq, Mustafa Barzani emerged as a central figure. armed conflict erupted in 1961 between Kurdish forces and the Iraqi state. Autonomy agreements were negotiated in 1970 but collapsed by 1974, leading to renewed warfare, probably very close to the current context in Syria between the Rojava administration and Ahmad al-Shah, former al-Qaeda member of the new president of Syria. So all speakers may be talking about that. Anyway, in Turkey, the 1960s saw the politicization of a new Kurdish generation influenced by South global leftist currents and developments in Iraq. Soon thereafter, Kurdish activism moved from tribal or elite frameworks toward Marxist-Leninist discourse. A new intelligentsia, largely plebeian in origin, conceptualized Kurdish self-determination through anti-colonial and class-based frameworks. In Iran, Kurdish resistance intensified during the 1979 revolution, but was violently suppressed by 1983, costing thousands of lives. Meanwhile, the Iran-Iraq war reshaped Kurdish alliances. The Iraqi state escalated repression through Arabization policies and the Anfal campaign of 1988, which included chemical attacks such as Halabja mass village destruction and tens of thousands of deaths. The 1980 appears as the darkest period in Kurdish modern history. Nonetheless, history turned again. The 1990 Gulf War produced a watershed moment. Following the uprising and mass displacement, a no-fly zone enabled the establishment of the de facto Kurdish autonomy in northern Iraq. In Turkey, the PKK launched a guerrilla war in 1984, reaching its peak influence in the early 1990s. Simultaneously, pro-Kurdish political parties pursued legal channels despite repeated closure. Kurdish politics now operated through both armed and parliamentary arenas. The 2003 invasion of Iraq marked another turning point in Kurdish history. The Kurdistan region of Iraq gained constitutional recognition in 2005. Kurdish leaders occupied key positions in Baghdad. The KRG exercised internal security control and maintained independent military forces. However, disputes over territories such as Kirkuk persisted. The early 21st century introduced new dynamics in Kurdish history. Kurdish politics remained largely secular and left-orientated even as Islamism rose regionally. Youth and women increasingly participated in politics. Women gained unprecedented visibility through co-chair system and armed participation, particularly in Turkey and Syria. In Turkey, ceasefires and negotiations between the PKK and the state created brief optimism between 1990 and 2025, and the last phase still in progress. The Syrian civil war after 2011 transformed Kurdish fortune once more. The PID established control in Kurdish majority regions. Meanwhile, ISIS rise in 2014 and the attempt genocide of the Yazidis mobilized Kurdish forces as central actors in the fight against extremism. In 2017, the Kurdistan region of Iraq held an independent referendum with overwhelming support for statehood. If I'm not mistaken, it received more than 90% support. However, regional and international opposition forced retreat. Iraqi forces retook disputed territories, including Kirkuk. Turkish intervention in Afrin and broader regional militarization underscored the vulnerability of Kurdish gains. The Kurdish question is a transnational issue, as you saw, rooted in empire and imperialism, shaped by partition and war, and marked by both repression and empowerment. Now, amid the new political change in the Middle East, the Kurdish question is still unsolved. As of 2023, everything has accelerated the dormant change in the region. Iran's regional power has been weakened and limited to Iran's border, while the country faced a new but predictable domestic crisis. Thousands of Iranians were killed. The future of the established power has remained uncertain. awaiting being shaped by the nuclear negotiation. In such context, the Kurds are the most mobilized political force, having organic connection between their communities, parties, and organization. Their contributions are crucial, and any change in Iran is impossible without addressing the demands of Kurdish people. The new Syrian government, Turkish-backed and led by Ahmed al-Shar, had launched a military offensive in Rojava, the autonomous administration, in order to rebuild a centralized government and help Turkey weaken the Kurdish forces. So to understand the Kurd is to understand the people continually navigating fragmentation and unity, autonomy and marginalization, and violence and political innovation. The Kurdish question is not an anomaly in the Middle East history. It is one of its most precedent structural features. Thank you so much. I'm kindly asking Dr. Vali to present their lecture, and then leave the floor for him.
Thank you very much, Aso. I would like to thank the center and everyone who has been in one way or another involved in preparing and making this occasion possible. I'm very grateful to them. I'm also happy to welcome my friend, colleague, Professor Bozarslan, after a very long time, joining him in a panel tonight, or it's tonight here for you, obviously, it's today. In order not to overlap, I think it would be better and, in fact, more efficient if I focus on Rojava and Professor Bozarslan then will talk about Rojava. I think this division of labor is in the interest of efficiency and also avoiding repetition in certain ways. So, Aso gave a very succinct chronological history of Kurds and the Kurdish question ever since the 16th century, and particularly focusing on modern times, which in the Middle East would be after the First World War. And which is crucial period really is in Kurdish history. This presentation told us the crucial issues which will be always repeated in this discussion, is that the Kurds are the largest stateless nation in the contemporary world, and they live under the sovereignty of four different states at present. And this means that whatever we talk about about the Kurds inevitably filters through their relationship with their sovereign states. And this means that Kurdish politics is really, when you discuss Kurdish politics, you will have to discuss their relationship or its relationship to the sovereign state under which they live or they are governed by it. Now, this relationship also is important in terms of the topic of this discussion, which talks about crisis. So when we talk about crisis in relation to the Kurds, this issue of crisis almost inevitably always is filtered through the relationship of the sovereign state to their regional neighbors and to their international actors, be they, if you like, the larger, more powerful ones or the less powerful ones in the international arena. At present, when we are talking about a crisis and colonialism, and then the Kurdish question in Iranian Kurdistan, I think I'm going to mostly focus in very contemporary issues and leave the history side, history part of it aside. The crisis that the most important crisis, which clearly we witness in the relationship to the Kurds happened after the Iranian Revolution of 1979. The rupture, the democratic rupture that took place in Iran, had meant that the structure of domination came apart, and all the suppressed identities, including and especially the Kurds, emerged out of these conditions and claimed with the kind of came to the fore, came to the political field, and they claimed their rights to have an autonomous region inside Iran. Now, here, in relation to Iran, I must say that the Iranian political forces in modern times, ever since the Kurdistan Republic in Iran in 1946, have always argued and demanded a political structure, autonomous political structure under the sovereignty of the Iranian state. And the quest for independence in Iran, at least up to this point, has not been the primary form of, if you like, demand, and has not been an issue organizing or deciding their relationship with the sovereign state above them. So after 1979, for one, their negotiations with the regime did not work, and that they ended up in a situation of war with the regime. And that war, ever since 1979, August of 1979, more or less continuously has been going on with Kurdish political forces. And at present, also, the Kurdish political forces are in a state of war with the Iranian state. This war, this conflict is not always leading to military confrontation, but their politics, which is the, if you like, refusal to accept the domination of Iranian state, and their opposition to the domination of Iranian state, has defined the conditions under which they have related to the Iranian state ever since 1979. This condition is one which I have defined as dialectics of violence. That it means that the Iranian Kurds have opposed the denial of their identities and opposed the denial of their rights. And this opposition, obviously, has led to a resistance. This dialectic of violence is a consequence of an opposition between domination and resistance. And very often, at the nexus of this dialectics, we have come to see blood, war, destruction, and so on and so forth. And at present, this violence, this dialectics continues, is perpetuating itself by the fact that the Iranian government refusing to accept the Kurdish demands for recognition, and the Kurds are refusing to accept the domination of the Iranian state without recognition of their rights. The situation of crisis, however, when we talk about crisis in the political sense, It is talking about more or less a situation of abnormality where all the connections and relations which usually sustain a situation of normality and stability somehow come apart. When they come apart, this situation of abnormality can, emerges. Here, the most important issue, which probably is still very relevant, not probably, most definitely very relevant to the conditions in Iranian condition, is the one which happened in the sort of repeatedly in the last 10, 15 years, and that is various uprisings in Iran affecting via the relationship of the Kurdish community to the sovereign state, affecting the Kurdish community. And if there is a crisis there, this crisis obviously has also filtering through the relationship of sovereign domination to the Kurdish resistance, has affected the structures, political structures, and also cultural relations and social relationships of Kurdish society. Now, the most recent in which the Kurdish community has been in the forefront of these critical conditions in Iran was with the uprising which came about in 2022 and in 16th of September 2022, when a young Kurdish girl was murdered by the morality police in Tehran, and the ceremony of her burial in the town of Sakız led to an uprising where the famous slogan of Jinjian Azadi, or woman life, freedom, was for the first time in Iran was chanted. And this was, very important in a sense that this uprising, which was happened in a graveyard of that young girl and in a cemetery in town of Sakız, spread like a fire on the bush, and spread through the town, through the other parts of Kurdistan, and from there very rapidly to large part of Iran, central Iran, non-Kurdish speaking Iranian hinterland. So that was, in a sense, the beginning of what was called the Jinjian Azadi revolution, or Jinjian Azadi uprising, or in a sense, Jina uprising. Now, why I am sort of focusing on this, because it gives a very vivid indication, or rather, example of the relationship of Kurdish community with the sovereign state, and also Kurdish community with the other forces of the democratic forces of change, as well as the conservative or non-democratic forces opposed to the change in the context of Iranian state and politics. The most important achievement of this situation, which simply turned to a massive, if you like, crisis for the Iranian state, probably the most important one before the last one, which was only a few weeks ago. It shook the foundation of the Iranian state. The most important achievements of it were, in a sense, first one was that for the first time in Iranian history, in modern Iranian history, the relationship between the Persian non-Kurdish center and the peripheral community, especially Kurdistan, and then Baluchistan, and part of Azerbaijan, and before that, the Khuzestan, the Arab community. It reversed the dynamics of politics in these conditions, because previously, before September 2022, usually the direction of the dynamics of the politics in Iranian Kurdistan, in Rojhelat, so to speak, was from center to the periphery. It was the center whenever a crisis always came, and the dynamics which shook the foundation, like the World Revolution of 1979, or the crisis in 2017 and 19, which usually happened in other parts of Iran and then affected Kurdistan. But this time it emerged and happened in Kurdistan, and the dynamics really was reversed. It was, direction of dynamics from Kurdistan to other parts of Iran. And this was a novelty in modern Iranian history, that the dynamics of this crisis, so to speak, was in the periphery, and that the center was more or less in the receiving end of it. The second important factor in this, I would say the second most important achievement of this movement in Iranian Kurdistan was the emergence of an intersectional political subject. Intersectional political subject, which was very, very important, because it was intersectional in the sense that it confronted the Iranian state in terms of confrontation with three structures of apartheid in the Iranian state. Here, when I say I'm talking about apartheid, I'm talking about a structure of discriminatory discourses and practices which are legalized and supported by law. And this discrimination were, if you like, sexual and gender discrimination, which obviously was against women, and also the other, LGBT communities and so on. And also there was a national and linguistic apartheid, which in center of it were the Kurds, the Baluchis, the Arabs, and the Azeri Turks, their languages and their culture and their national identity by this structure of discriminatory practices and discourses legalized and supported by the state were always denied. And the third one was a kind of, the religious apartheid, and that goes back to the Iranian constitution, where Shi'i religion is considered as the official religion of the state, and other religions, although recognized, but they never have the privileges of the dominant formal official religion. Now, this new subject, which happened, this intersectional subject, which I subsequently, in my writings about it, called it the Jina subject in Iran, in Kurdistan, is spread and became the most important bearer of democratic opposition to the theocratic state in Iran. And this subject, although and in the course of this uprising, what happened obviously is that the civil society in the Iranian Kurdistan, in Rojhelat, was very, very strongly and very deeply radicalized. And this radicalization, however, after it was very massively and in a very bloody way suppressed, this radicalization clearly didn't go away. And it is still there. In Iranian Kurdistan, we have a fairly radical civil society, but obviously it's a civil society which is also, because of going through all these uprisings and so on, now has adopted a more of a rational outlook to the crisis, present crisis, than, let's say, emotional outlook of the olden days. And they are now, it's very interesting that in the crisis that is going on in Iran, and it was obviously the most clearly we saw it in January and early part of February, last February. This crisis now it is epicenter of it. It is in Tehran and other Persian cities, and it is very rather. What looks surprising here is that the peripheral communities, which is Kurdistan, Baluchistan, and the Khuzestan, the Arab, if you like, community in Khuzestan, which previously were the centers of opposition to the state, and they were always in the forefront of uprisings against the state. This time they are relatively quiet, and that this war with the state is mostly being carried out in other parts of Iran, the Persian-speaking Iran, so to speak. Here, of course, I don't want to, completely say that Kurdistan has been quiet. The town of Kermashan has been very active and has been suppressed badly, and also southern parts of, Kurdistan, which are bordering, Luristan region in Elam and parts of and around that area, was also very active in the current crisis and in opposition to the state. Now, and of course, very badly suppressed. I mean, this suppression that took place in Iran in the current, if you like, uprising in Iran has been, by all accounts, unprecedented. And there are various and very different accounts of it. The state's account is something, as I recall, about 4,000, nearly 4,000. The state obviously claims nearly 4,000. The human rights organizations go further up, something in the region of nearly under 10,000. And but then, independent, if you like, organizations like the Chamber of Doctors, Lawyers, and so on in Iran go much higher, much, much higher. Some even go to I was listening to the testimony of some Iranian doctors. They were talking about 60,000 dead. And President Trump only a few days ago came out with the figure of 32,000 that have been killed. Now, whatever these, figures all tell us that the large number of people were indiscriminately murdered, killed in this uprising. And what is, however, important is this, that the situation of Kurdish question as a question of, a quest for recognition of rights within an autonomous federal structure inside Iran and under Iranian sovereignty is still persists. And it is one of the major issues in the organization and the attitude and position of Iranian opposition to the state. The Iranian opposition to the state are widely divided and divided on issues which are related to the, if you like, their perception of future Iran. The perception of future Iran, which is given in the plans and the discourses, and sometimes even the practices of the right-wing opposition, this is an Iran which is highly centralized and is ruled, well, this is the perception for future, is highly centralized, and it is ruled by an authoritarian state which has got one singular national identity, singular language, singular culture, and singular history. And this state claims to be the guardian of Iranian culture, to be also the initiator of a process or process of development from above, is a kind of authoritarian modernization which is carried through, or rather continued from where it was left out under the previous monarch and his father. Now, this is the situation they are. And in the worldview, or rather the plan that this opposition has for currently for the Iranian minorities, so to speak, or rather the non-sovereign communities. I would prefer to call them non-sovereign communities, such as Kurdish community, such as the Baluchi community, Arab and Azeri, Turkish and Turkmen communities in Iran. The plan they have for it is basically non-recognition of their identity, continuation of the suppression of their identity under this proposed authoritarian single nation, single language, single, if you like, identity state. So in which clearly, in the critical condition that is now going on in Iran, in the outlook of the right wing, and among the right wing, in this spectrum of right wing forces in Iran, the monarchists are the dominant forces, and the monarchists obviously subscribe to this authoritarian and singular, identity state, and they deny the Kurdish rights. They deny to accept their demands for autonomy, and also even they denied their, go as far as deny their right to have education in their mother tongue, in Kurdish or in Baluchi or in Arab or in Azeri, Turkish. So in a sense, in the world outlook of the non-democratic right-wing spectrum of right-wing forces, the national issue, which they call it the ethnic issue, that ethnic issue has no place whatsoever. They say that we are all Iranians and that we need only one language and one culture and so on and so forth. Among the democratic opposition, that is the opposition which believes in a republican state for the future Iran, which this republican state, according to them, is to be a democratic political structure with a democratic political process. But that opposition is quite weak comparatively compared to the monarchists. And one of the main reasons for their weakness clearly has been their attitude towards the national or ethnic communities in Iran, the Kurds, Baluchis, and so on. Because although they proclaim democracy, although they argue and state their commitment to democracy, democratic forces, and democratic political process in Iran. They are extremely skeptical and even at times oppositional to the acceptance of Kurdish demands, Azeri demands, and Arab demands, in a sense, for autonomy inside Iran. In other words, the democratic opposition, because of this opposition, their opposition to the ethnic or national community and their demands failed to two things. One of them was they failed to draw a clear line with non-democratic forces. This was on the issue of recognition of the national rights, and autonomy for the national communities, and genuine pluralistic political processes in Iran. For failing to accept that, they couldn't draw a kind of demarcation line with right-wing anti-democratic forces. That was one of the reasons for their weakness. And the second reason was that among themselves, they couldn't bring themselves to form a front in which the national or ethnic communities will participate strongly and on a, if you like, viable democratic basis. Now that they have lost the game more or less inside Iran and outside to the right-wing forces, they've come to accept their mistakes, and we see that in last few days there have been attempts in London and Berlin for conferences whereby Kurdish forces have been invited to join and make presentations. Although it is a little bit late, but I think it is, as they say, it's better be late than never, so to speak. But also the other thing is that we are now in a situation of very, what I would say, a very high and rather complex crisis inside Iran. Iran is what I call suffering from a systemic crisis. It is a crisis which is taken over, and it's the political, the state system, so to speak. It is not just economy. It is not just culture. It is not just social issues. It is not just foreign relationship. It is a total systemic crisis in it. And if you see what that in systemic crisis would say that, okay, this state might be living on a borrowed time, but it is in fact living on borrowed time. But the problem is this, that there are never a strong opposition strong enough to unseat the state and the government. And this is continuing. And also the balance of forces in the region, which have been largely sort of shaken to their, and in a sense shaken and also come down in largely, fallen down, and it's being rebuilt in the region. I would say for a long time, but particularly after the October 7 and the October 7 Al-Aqsa storm, the crisis that was created by the Hamas attack on Israel and so on and so forth. This crisis, to begin with, didn't seem to affect Iran very much, but the way that it went on and the way that it was dealt with, Iran was deprived of its proxy forces, deprived of its influence in Syria, was kicked out of Syria, and also now is being kicked out of Iraq. It is very, very clear that the way that America is approaching the post-election arrangements in Iraq is that, it wants to have a political system installed in Iraq, a political arrangement made in Iraq, which would minimize Iranian influence. And this is being achieved today. They said that the Iraqi political elite has accepted to go along the way that America has suggested, or actually not suggested, but imposed on them. It is not suggested, it's imposed on them. So this is the situation. The crisis in the Middle East has largely affected Iranian political structure. The strategic depth of Iran, which at one time, 2 years ago, it was claimed to be in southern Lebanon, covered all of Syria, and went as far as Yemen, and then also, was the dominant influence in Iraq. That is now shattered. And the strategic influence of Iran, the strategic depths of Iran could hardly be contained, could hardly reach its geographical borders at the moment. So in this situation of crisis, the Kurdish question and forms of approach and resolution of Kurdish question, once again inside Iran, has come to the political agenda. But this time is very different to 1979. This time, if in 1979 most of the democratic forces were supporting the Kurdish quest for autonomy, and at least in the first 2 years after the revolution, now the situation is rather different. And that majority of the right-wing forces are entirely against it. Majority of the democratic forces are not influential forces. They can't really affect the political agenda significantly. And Kurds, which are claiming autonomy, and one of the conditions of realization of autonomy is either having a democratic state in the center, which is not there, and which is highly unlikely that is going to be there. So that is it. And if failing to have a democratic state in Iran, the Kurds should have strong allies among the democratic forces. Unfortunately, at present, Kurds do not have those allies among the democratic forces in Iran. So I would say that whatever happens, outcome of this crisis is that Kurdish question will still be calling for a resolution inside Iran. And I would say that the likelihood of a political, if you like, situation emerging in Iran, whereby the Kurdish demand for autonomy or federalism will be heeded, accepted, and materialized, this prospect seems very weak. And I would say that unless there is a democratic opposition and strong enough to grab the hold of the state and also control it and accept to sit down and negotiate a kind of democratic solution to the Kurdish question in Iran. With the exception of this, I don't see a very bright future in this present situation. And I am rather pessimistic about it, I'm sorry to say. So I think I've said enough about this situation, and I will leave the rest for question time, when you will be responding to what has been presented here. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vali. I kindly request Dr. Bozarslan to present their lectures.
Thank you so much, Diraso. I thank also to Sancher and all those have been involved in this the preparation of this event. And I'm very so happy to see again Professor Vali. We have worked a lot by the past. We are still in touch, but seeing him on Zoom, that's a pleasure. And I am thankful to Professor Vali also because not only he presented a brilliant uh, has given a brilliant presentation of the situation in the Rojava, but basically put also the conceptual and theoretical tools to think the Kurdish issue in the Rojava and broadly speaking, in Kurdistan, because this issue of dialectic of state and state coercion and Kurdish violence, state domination and the Kurdish responses. This dialectic is actually also true, also available, also true for the rest of Kurdistan. So I would insist much more on the Rojava and on Bakur. And I would say that 35 years ago, you mentioned that also the heart of the Kurdish of Kurdistan was beating in the Iraqi Kurdistan. The issue was the issue of survival. Will the Kurds survive? If they survive, what will be the cost? And I would say that 35 years later, today, the heart of Kurdistan beats in the Rojava, not only of the Kurds of Syria, but broadly speaking, all the Kurds. And hopefully, one can say that a new page starts in the Rojava after the 13 years of existence in very difficult conditions. But it is also true that we have assisted or we have observed a very brutal setback in the Rojava. And this setback is still on, and I will come back to this issue. But we can also maybe say that at least in theory, the Rojava has still its armed forces. It has still its Asayish forces. It means the internal security forces. The Kurdish resistance and construction is there, and this resistance and construction has never been exclusively a military construction and resistance. The Kurds could, by the past, even in the 1970s, 1980s, but particularly during the last 13 years, created civil institutions. And I think that this civil institutionality is absolutely important for the Kurds. The municipalities, the hospitals, the schools, the publishing houses, the fact that the publishing houses publish in Kurdish, the Kurdish curriculum, all this institutionality is absolutely vital for the Kurds. And today, I think that it is very important to preserve this institutionality. At the same time, we have a memory of 15 years of fight. This memory is also important as the memory of the Mohabbat Republic was for the Kurds by the past and the memory of the Bardani Rebellion. We assisted to new practices in the gender relations. We saw the formation of new generations. The generation of 2013 to 2012, 2013, when Kurdistan, when Rojava has been created, so to say. They are today, some of them, they are 20, 25 years, and they have experienced only the Rojava experience. And it is important to impose the cultural recognition of the Kurds as a constitutional requirement, not only as a measure that has been accepted by Damascus, but as one of the pillars of the future Syrian state. And it is also important, of course, that the Kurdish delegation, the Rojava delegation, Abdi and Ahmed, have been received by Rubio together with the Syrian delegation. And that means that at one point, there might be the possibility to transform the promised rights, because Ahmed al-Shara has promised a lot of rights, into a real local power. Maybe this local power will not be named an autonomy, a formal autonomy. Maybe Ankara will never accept the existence of an autonomous region. But at the same time, I think that it might be possible to transform the de facto situation into a practical, in practice, into an autonomy. And at the same time, we know that the Kurds of Rojava, they cannot trust on Damascus, they cannot trust in Ankara, they cannot even trust in the United States. It is extremely important also to know that the Kurds of Rojava, they have to integrate the untrust as their ontological condition, at least for a long period. Because we know that without a Kurdish resistance that lasted 24 hours in the Rojava, probably the situation would have been absolutely catastrophic and the Kurdish forces would have been dismantled. And it is very important also to underline that the Kurdish mobilizations have been extremely important in the survival, in very difficult conditions, in the survival of the Rojava. These mobilizations were partly the diaspora mobilizations, but this mobilization was also partly diplomatic mobilization. We observed that the Rojava's diplomacy was quite weak, and at the same time, the Bashur's diplomacy has been at the service of Rojava. Understanding the Kurdishness as a holistic Kurdishness, not only as a Syrian Kurdishness, not only as an Iraqi Kurdishness, but as a holistic Kurdishness, and being able to mobilize the resources, including the diplomatic resources of the Iraqi Kurdistan for Rojava, is one of the most important points that we have to take into account. And we should never forget that the Kurdish struggle, you have mentioned that also, Professor Vali has mentioned it too, is a collective transborder issue. The Kurdish issue is the issue of becoming a subject of history, being recognized as a collective subject of the history, not only in each part of Kurdistan, but also broadly speaking in the region. The situation in the Rojava still is very precarious. One of the reasons is that the human rights violations, they continue. Kobane is besieged since more than 1 month. We don't have a clear picture of what will be the future decisions of Ankara. And at the same time, the world conditions, I will come back to this issue, they are not the most favorable ones to the Kurds or to anyone, actually. We assist to a kind of destruction of reason, a kind of egocracy. Egocracy was one of the concepts that a French philosopher used for the egocratic powers. And Hannah Arendt was also impressed and afraid by the emergence of this egocratic power. And it means that at one point you have no visibility at all. And the United States, the biggest power in the world, has become a kind of ghost ship. That it is not the first time it happens in the American history, but for those who are my age or Abbas Vali's age, we remember the period of Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan was an absolutely unpleasant president, but at least we could predict what will he do. That's not the situation today in the world politics, and we have to take that into account. And at the same time, we have to be aware that Syria's future is quite black. The Syrian government, Al-Shara government, has actually never renounced to transform Syria into an Islamic Emirate. An Islamic Emirate in which the Ummah does exist, but the Ummah cannot be divided. It means that the Kurds will not be accepted, and the Druze and the Alawites will have no right even to life. Everybody speaks about a Syrian state and a Syrian army. Actually, there is no Syrian state and there is no Syrian army. We have a coalition of 17 or 18 militia forces. Some of these militia forces, they depend directly on Turkey. They receive their salaries from Turkey. They armed from Turkey. They tactics from Turkey. Some others, they are the foreign jihadists, among them the Uyghurs, the Uzbeks, the Chechens, and many of them actually, they are interested in booty and they have no ideological commitments. And we saw that already in Afrin, when they conquered so-called the Afrin, there were internal fights between the jihadist forces for booty. And we have to be aware that this situation will not be over. The Syrian government has no social basis. The electors, the electoral body has been reduced only to 6,000 people. So 6,000 people actually basically have voted what the government has proposed to them as deputy. And at the same time, we might assist to a very dangerous American strategy consisting in using the Sunni jihadist militias against Hashdi Shabi, which are the Shia militias. So militias versus militias. And I think that this has been experienced already by the past in Afghanistan. At the beginning of Al-Qaeda, in the emergence of Al-Qaeda, there is this strategy of using a violent Sunnism against Soviet Union, and today repeating the same tactic will produce a very dangerous situation. It is obvious that one cannot accept the existence of non-state armed forces in Iraq. It is obvious that the Hashdi Shabi they constitute a threat not only for the Iraqi society, not only for the Kurds, but for any kind of stability in Iraq, but crashing down them by using the Syrian militia forces, Sunni militia forces, would be a catastrophe. As I said, the Rojava is still alive, but it has experienced a very dramatic setback. And probably in this setback, we have also to evaluate the past of the Kurdish movement. The Kurdish movement was obliged to survive to some extent during the 13 years against the jihadism, against the Turkish attacks. And at the same time, I think that maybe the Kurdish movement has also committed some mistake. For instance, they were obliged to go to Raqqa. We have forgotten that Raqqa was the second capital of the Islamic State with Mosul. They were obliged to go to Deir ez-Zor because the jihadist movement was very strong. But remaining there probably was a mistake. Because Raqqa has its own sociology, which has nothing to do with the Kurdish sociology, the sociology of the Kurdish part of Syria. Raqqa is a city where the jihadist movement is still very strong. Raqqa was historically a city where the notabilities were very close to the Arab nationalism, maybe not necessarily to Baas, but to Arab nationalism. And it was obvious that in Raqqa, the Kurds could not have a long-term presence and experiment there a kind of democratic federalism or confederalism. And the same is also true for Deir ez-Zor. Deir ez-Zor is dominated by the tribes. And these tribes today, they fight against Damascus. And the tribal structures, all anthropologists, sociologists, and historians know what the tribal structures are, why the tribes do exist, what does it mean a state that is weakened. Each time that a state is weakened, the tribes, they are getting strong, but this means also that they create very important unites or entities, economic entities, military entities, and it was obvious that this anthropological, let's say, landscape was not at all similar to what you observe in Kurdistan. And I think that it is time today, maybe that the actors in Rojava, they define themselves as mainly Kurdish. They have a Kurdish interpretation of the Rojava and not a very broad interpretation of Syria, not exporting a model that does not work in the Syrian conditions to the rest of Syria. One should also bear in mind that the Syrian society has been destroyed. Syria of 2012, 11-12, had 23 million inhabitants. 500,000 of them, they have been killed. And we have 12 or 13 million exiled people or displaced people. So the most important thing today is to create a legal and rational state in this country and to preserve Kurdistan, preserve Kurdish regions, and to say very clearly that the main targets of Kurdistan, of Rojava, is to remain a Kurdish Rojava. and while remaining Kurdish Rojava, creating a much more fluid relation with the Bashur, with the Iraqi Kurdistan. And I think that this evolution will probably bring a lot of resources to Rojava, but it will also symbolically reinforce Bashur. And when you speak about Rojava, actually you speak also about the Bakur, the Kurdistan of Turkey. And here we have the second dialectic of the Kurdish issue. The Kurdish issue is one and at the same time plural. No Kurdish actor can be isolated from the others, and at the same time, no Kurdish actor can be reduced to the others. What happened in Syria, the Rojava experience, could not be separated from the Kurdish-Turkish experience and from the PKK actually, from PKK's teaching, ways of being, ways of acting, ways of thinking, the military strategy. And at the same time, the Rojava experience cannot be reduced to the PKK experiences. And that explains why today in Turkey, the entire Kurdish community is so sensible to the Kurdish issue in the Rojava. But at the same time, we have also a peace process, a process that which has no name actually, going on in Turkey. At the beginning of this process, and Professor Vali has mentioned the impact of 7 October 2023 on Iran. At the beginning of this process, actually, we have the same process, the same event, 7th of October, the Hamas attacks on Israel. And when the process in Turkey has started, Bahçeli, the leader of the far-right nationalist Turkish movement, has declared that everything should be done in order to protect and reinforce the internal front against imperialism, quote unquote, and against Zionism, quote unquote. And today, when you take the discourse, the official discourse in Turkey, including at the parliamentary level, you have three elements that coming in. And in no one of these elements, the Kurdish issue is defined as a national issue. The first element is to say that the Kurds might be manipulated by imperialism and Zionism, so to do everything in order to integrate them. And that means that at one point, the recognition of the Kurdish issue as a national issue, the recognition of the Kurds as a national community is not possible. The second element coming in is the need to end with terrorism. Terrorism, it means the 50 years of PKK's fighting. And that means that you reduce the PKK's fighting and the 50 years of Turkish Kurdish history into the terrorism, once again, without taking into account the state's the policy of denial, the state's repression, the death squadrons, the jails, whatever you can imagine. And the third issue, saying that the Kurdish issue is an issue of the Islamic Ummah to dissolve to some extent the Kurdish national demand into one single Islamic community. As if you could say that the Catalan issue, the Basque issue, the Scottish issue, or the Quebec issue do not exist because they are all Christians, and the Christian Ummah will be enough to integrate the Basques and the Catalans. And that's a kind of perversion that we have today in Turkey, which means that the Kurds are de facto recognized, PKK is de facto an interlocutor, Abdullah Öcalan has become an interlocutor, and at the same time, the question is not named. The question is not named, and at the same time, I think that today we have a very dynamic Kurdish society in Turkey. This dynamism can be explained by the fact that we have constant mobilizations going back to the 1960s. When you take, for instance, in Turkey, the Turkish part of Turkey, you have basically two political generations. the 68ers and the 78ers. It means that those generations that were 20 and entered in the scene in 1968 or in 1978. But when you take the Kurdistan, you have the 68ers, 78ers, 88ers, 98ers, whatever you can imagine. And the oldest Kurdish leaders, now today they are 80, and the youngest ones, they are 20, 25. And this fact explains that at the same time, many other things changed. Kurdistan has been widely urbanized. Today, we have a Kurdistan urbanized up to 75% almost. We have gender-based dynamics because there was a gender women representation at many levels, namely political and municipal levels. We have class dynamics because now we have middle classes have emerged in Kurdistan. We have a generational dynamics, renewal. We have an intellectual life, artistic creativity, a political dynamism. And although there is a very heavy economic and political crisis going on and very massively authoritarian or anti-democratic regime, the Kurdish movement could not be eliminated. And I think that in this context, it is very important for the Kurdish actors in Turkey to develop a kind of political pedagogy, a democratic pedagogy that explains that the Kurdish issue is not an issue of imperialism or Zionism, that the Kurdish issue is definitely not an issue of terrorism, that's a national issue that has to be recognized at once in Turkey and in the Middle East, in each part of the Middle East, denouncing the Turkish ideology, which has a history going back to Abdul Hamid II. It means before 1908, which proclaimed the supremacy of Islam, and within Islam the supremacy of the Turkishness, saying that the Kurdish fight is a fight for equality, which does not accept supremacy of any kind in Turkey, and at the same time explaining that the Kurdish issue is not a religious issue, and definitely not an issue of religious brotherhood. After all, the Kurds are also brothers with the Armenians, who have suffered by the past, who have experienced a genocide, or with the Greeks, or whatever you can imagine. And at the same time, I think that it is very important to know that the Kurdish issue cannot be resolved in a non-democratic or anti-democratic Turkey. And here I think that the Spanish experience of 1975, 1978 is extremely important. What happened in Spain during this period was that the Spanish political class, namely the left-wing movements that have been legalized, but also the right-wing movements, they have legitimized the issue of democracy. Without democracy, Spain can have no future. And at the same time, they legitimized the Basque and the Catalan issues as national issues. Maybe they have not been named as national issues, but there was a federal autonomous perspective that had been presented. So democratization and the solution of the Basque and Catalan questions, they went hand in hand. While today in Turkey, we have a kind of Putinization of Turkey with the arrest of the mayor of Istanbul. There are thousands of people in prisons. The discourse of the language of state is a very aggressive language. So I think that without these changes, probably in Turkey, we will not have a bright future, whatever the issue of the current negotiations or the current relations rather than negotiations might be. And I think that once again, we have to remember that Kurdistan, the Kurdish issue, is an issue in Turkey, in Iraq, in Syria, and in Iran. And at the same time, it is a Middle Eastern issue. The Kurds have experienced a very dark periods by the past. You mentioned it, the 1980s were probably one of the darkest periods in the Kurdish history. Today, we are not exactly in the same situation. Of course, we don't know what the presidency in the United States will decide. I think that no one can know what will be the future strategies, future decisions of the White House within 24 or 48 hours concerning the war with Iran, but concerning also the future of Syria, concerning the future of Iraq. So we are we are in a situation, as I said, of an egocracy, and an egocracy finds its source and its horizon in itself, and not in rationalities or of any kind, or not in check and balances. And at the same time, I would say that in spite of these very difficult conditions, we are not in post 75 period. What was post 75? When the Barzani movement has collapsed in a couple of weeks, that has created a huge trauma, and the Kurdish movement has entered in a very dark period of melancholia and over radicalization. And the PKK actually was a result of this fall, of this collapse of the Bardani movement and this dark period. And just remember, you mentioned it, the chemical attacks in Iraq against the Kurds. After these chemical attacks, there was almost impossible to create any kind of a reaction in the world press or in the political class. The thing changed only in 89, when the Kurdish Institute has organized in Paris an international conference. So I think that we have to be very careful. The situation is dark. The situation is not brilliant. The danger is not over. Rojava is still struggling for its survival. Tomorrow, Kekabas mentioned it, in the Rojalat, we might have a very difficult period too. The situation in the Rojava is already extremely difficult. But at the same time, we have also to remember that the Kurds have experienced an empowerment. This empowerment is a process. And this empowerment is supposed to preserve the resources that they do exist, and to enlarge these resources. So I think that we should be in a situation of untrust concerning Ankara, Damascus, whatever you can imagine. We should not trust too much in ourselves, not either, but at the same time, we should not be in a subjectivity, a regime of subjectivity of total darkness. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your deep analysis on Kurdish question in almost four parts of Kurdistan. I'd already had a question, and I'm going to mix it with a topic which has been brought up during your analysis, Dr. Bozarslan, about the collective activity, collective resistance on Kurdish people. As you explained that Kurdish resistance is a collective resistance, and we can't describe it in the other way. And over the past few weeks, we saw the historical evolving trans-regional Kurdish identity. I mean, the rallies in Bashur, in Bakur, in Rojhelat, and after the new offensive attack by Ahmed Ashar government. I would like, and then you mentioned that any kind of, you mentioned that the catastrophe result of 1974 Barzani uprising resulted in a radicalization, Kurdish political specifically affected the PKK resistance, and turned into the new phase of armed struggle. I have a question regarding if the current negotiation between Damascus and Rojava, and negotiation between Turkey and Bakur, between Ankara and Bakur, experience a new catastrophe and collapse, what would happen? What would be the future of Kurdish question? Do you think if we experience a new phase of radicalization, or no, we may have another kind of resistance? Specifically, PKK has already announced this armament, and we can say there is no armed group in Baku, and like the Bashur is a formally established government. Is we can't consider like the armed group or a part of armed resistance.
Yeah. So I would say, first of all, that Rojava has received a very important setback, but we cannot say that there is a situation of collapse. So hope for the better. And I think that the Kurdish resistance in the Rojava is one of the most important key factors. And the Bashur's resistance, the courage of the Bashur saying that we defend Rojava, is also one of the most important points. It is also important to see that there are some channels between the Kurds and the American Senate, with Graham, with other senators. So I think that for while being, at least, we should not be in a catastrophe, in a strategy or in a scenario of catastrophe. Otherwise, I would say that, of course, no historian will make any kind of prediction for the future. It is very difficult to know what will happen if that or that scenario is realized in the future. But I would say that the historical conditions have changed. In 1975 was the end of the Vietnam War. 1975, that was the period of the decolonial war in Mozambique, the end of the decolonial war in Mozambique, in Angola, in Guinea, etc. The idea of the revolutionary violence was legitimized as a commonplace in the world history. And in Turkey and in Kurdistan particularly, we had almost no middle classes. We had either an intelligentsia or the plebeian strata. Today, the situation is very different. Today, the political language has changed. The political language in the world has changed, and the Kurdish political language itself has changed. The Kurds, they speak many languages now, many Kurdish languages, artistic language, intellectual language, language of the social sciences, language of the cinema. So I think that the Kurdish intellectual political imaginary has changed. 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 75% of Kurdistan was rural. Today, 75% of Kurdistan in Turkey, but not only in Turkey, is urban. So all this, the expectations of the middle classes, can be very different. They might be very patriotic. They might be very committed to the Kurdish, to the defense of the Kurdish cause. But at the same time, we have plural, heterogeneous expectations. So I would say that the conditions of 1975, they are not there. But of course, no one can exclude in the future new waves of the radicalization. And Abbas has already explained them. What happens in Iran? Iran is also urbanized up to 75%, but we see one another after another periods of radicalizations. 1997, 1997. Then after 2009, then after 2014, 2019, 2022, and the urban population at some point can create also radicalizations. The middle classes, usually they are against any form of radicalizations, but we know that in some conditions, even the middle classes can rebel. And the last rebellion in Iran actually was not the rebellion of the young woman. That was not only the rebellion of the youth. That was also the rebellion of the Bazaris and the Bazaris with the clergy were the main elements that have brought this power, this government, Khomeini to power. Voice.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I have many questions, but I think I should ask a question. I bring up a topic, Dr. Vali, and then leave the podium for the audience. They may have many questions. My question, from Dr. Vali is to regard the recent coalition between Kurdish political parties. You mentioned that the weakness of democratic opposition in Iran is one of the reasons that refrains them from forming a democratic bloc against the far right opposition, which is monarchist, and the Islamic Republic as the established, like the extremist, theocratic extremist power. Do you think if this coalition injects any hope for future, not only for Kurdish people, but also for other marginalized nations within the borderlands of Iran?
I think this, let's say coalition, yes, it's a good sign. It's necessary, but it is in no way enough. I think everything which is said in words has to be related to specific institutions. In other words, the demands of this coalition must be inside the coalition institutionalized. I have long argued for the idea of having a united, if you like, administration which will deal with the outside world of these parties, right? Even going as far as saying that it is the necessary time to have a united military command. You see, because we do not know what's going to happen in Iran. The likelihood of this government continuing is more than it's collapsing. But let's say if it collapses, we don't know what form this collapse is going to take, you see. And this united military front that I am talking about is necessary if the center collapses, like the example of Iraqi Kurdistan, so that you shall have to have forces to protect the community, to establish an administration, to run the day-to-day life of the community. This cannot be done in a state of chaos, particularly in a society which is in a deep economic and social crisis. Therefore, I think I welcome this coalition, but I would say that they have to do much more. They have to consolidate. They have to plan. They haven't done it before. And this plan must be around. I have again in various conferences where the Kurdish political forces or their representatives have been present. I've argued for, this kind of coalition around a minimum program. This minimum program would allow these parties to come to this coalition without their ideological positions, because they have their ideological position, they're not going to give it up. But if you have a minimum political program, then you can agree on that without bringing in your ideological positions. Once that is achieved, then I think they should go into the second circle, and that is to establish relations, or possibly coalition, with other non-Persian communities, the Baluchis, the Arabs, part of, Azeri. For instance, Azeri is a problematic in certain ways. At present, it is the most anti-monarchist community in Iran. The most anti-monarchist community in Iran is the Turkish Azeri community. But on the other hand, we know historically there is a deep-rooted conflict with the Kurds over territory. So there has to be negotiation with this community, with the Baluchis and so on, to form a coalition. This coalition is very important. It is absolutely necessary if they want to negotiate with the community, with the government in Tehran, whoever that government should be. It's either a very weakened Islamic republic, or it's another government replacing it. But if there is a united coalition of non-Persian communities, over issues of national rights, national languages, administration, decentralized political administrations under Iranian sovereignty and so on and so forth. These are going to be very important. And this is the time to really rapidly and quickly plan, because a lot of time has been wasted, and they've been wasted by the Kurds themselves, Kurdish political forces, party rivalries, ideological orthodoxies, and these have been very, very negative. And they have been, they have had strongly negative effects on the existing political situation. So I would say yes, this is okay. For instance, yesterday or last 2 days, there had been a congress for the Iranian salvation, or Iranian, whatever, rescuing Iran. Now that congress is important, but I would have liked to see Kurds appearing in this congress as a bloc, not as a party, not as a Kurdish bloc. Now, to appear in this, or there is another one maybe formed next week or so, but Kurds have to appear in this as a bloc with a spokesperson or couple of spokespersons, to represent Kurdish demands on the basis of that very minimum program that I have taken. Minimum program is the legalization of education in Kurdish, legalization of regional autonomy. The arguments, whether these arguments about federalism, what kind of federalism they're proposing for Iran. If you don't have those issues settled, you can't go into a bloc and confront the center. Now, these are absolutely essential issues. So going back to your question, I think that it's a very positive step. I see, it gives me hope, for instance, to see the KTPI sitting with Pajak sitting with Komala sitting with the Islamic party, and that is sitting with the party which is proclaiming independence for Kurdistan. All of these are in the same block, but I would have liked the other two forces also coming to this. And I read their objections. I must say that I found the objections of the Komale, which is the branch of the Communist Party of Iran, as absolutely unacceptable. Going back to the textbook orthodoxies of 50 years ago, not 50 years, 100 years ago, really. And that situation, if the world has left the discourse of Islamic government and Islamic state behind, it has also left that kind of orthodoxy behind. That is a non-starter. The other, Mr. Mohtadi's, I think some of his objections are acceptable. But I think that objections are something to be created, not to be asked for now. He should come in with his party and try to create that or lay the foundations for that. So all in all, I think it's a good step. Maybe it is too little, but I hope it is not too late. But it is essential, necessary, but there has got to be a basis to build on.
Thank you. As the time is running up, I'm stop asking question and bringing up topic. I would like to open the floor for audience please raise your hand if you have any question, if you want to ask about any topics and so on. Or if you can't talk, you're not in the condition to talk, you can write in the chat box and I read your question for our speakers.
Yeah, just a note, please use the chat function appropriately. The Q&A will proceed in chat, so please type out your question. And then Aso will select whichever ones that she can use. So yeah, please use the chat function. I have enabled it for participants.
Oh, okay. Okay, we got a question. It's a long question. I would like to thank the organizer centers, Comparative Muslim Studies, and I'm sorry, as the time is short, I have to ignore the first part. Thank you so much. If your analysis, there seemed to be a rather pessimistic outlook regarding the situation of the Kurds in Rojava and Rojava. To Professor Abbas Vali, what political and institutional groundwork should Kurd actors in Rojava begins building now to secure a stable position in a future post-regime Iran? And how can they prepare to negotiate effectively within a new political order? And they have also the question for Professor Bozarslan, but I'm reading it after Dr. Vali answer.
Well, as I said, I am pessimistic because we have been taken by the speed of the events, really. The way that events have developed in the last few months, we are overtaken by it. And we are behind, much behind. And largely because I am talking, I'm talking basically about our political parties who didn't have the foresight to prepare for such an eventuality that we are facing now. But I think at least there is this, that the Kurdish opposition at the moment in the camp of the democratic opposition in Iran, Kurdish opposition is the most organized. And it has a history, it has an institutions, it has a specific political discourse, although this specific political discourse had to be, if you like, modernized very much. But at the moment, it is what is there. What I am worried about is that we have in Iranian Kurdistan, in my view, a radicalized civil society, a very radicalized and educated intelligentsia. They have a very different perception of political future. They have very different perception of democracy and democratic political process. And that may be, from my point of view, a significant gap between the way they see the world and the way that political parties see the world. I hope political parties try to get closer to this part, to understand them, and this gap was very much in evidence during the Xinjiang Azadi uprising. The discourse, the form of practice, the kind of vision of future which came out, the position that they give to women, to sexual difference, religious difference, to gender difference and religious difference, and also to question of language, ethnicity, and so on in the context of a wider political structure is different to the way that political parties were right or either the political parties of the center left or left in Kurdish politics see this issue. Now, this is the issue, the gap that I see, and I fear that if there is a situation of collapse, the example of 1979 may not be repeated because society has changed and has changed rapidly. Therefore, their perception of politics has changed. Their perception of radicalism has changed. Their perception of their future inside Iran has changed. So these are matters which I think had to be taken into consideration. They should not be taken for granted. There's support from grassroots in society. There will be welcome political parties. It is true. But the support for them in the long or medium term is not guaranteed. So the likelihood of new political forces emerging should not be discarded, disregarded, so to speak. This is why I'm saying that the situation is not crystal clear, and because we don't really know. First, we don't know what's going to happen in Iran. Secondly, I don't think the political parties have done exactly what they had to do to face this situation. What is there now is what we have to cope with and try to make best of it.
I really appreciate it. Dear Schiller, sorry, as there are more questions to distribute the time appropriately, I'm going to ask the other questions. And if we get time, I'll go back to the second question. So there's another question that what do you think about the people of Rojava and other nationalities forming their own self-governance like Rojava instead of waiting for the current state to fall? It hasn't been mentioned who would like to be answered, but I don't know if Dr. Bozarslan, you would like you answer the question.
That on this issue, Professor Vali can answer, but I see that there was a question also concerning the Rojava. I will be very brief, and because we don't have enough time. So what the political class in the Rojava should do, I think that the first and most important thing is that Rojava has to survive. Rojava, the Kurdistan needs Rojava, but Syria needs also Rojava. But I think that today the survival is much more important than applying any kind of ideological or political framework. Might it be democratic confederalism? So making Rojava really Rojava. Second, I think that using all the diplomatic channels in the United States, but also in Europe, in order to have a full application of the 29-30 January agreement, because this agreement is a legal document, but it has to be applied. And for this, I think that the Kurds need to mobilize their diplomatic supports. And the third thing, I think that it is absolutely important that the Kurdish political class gets integrated inside itself. We have two forces, and these two forces, they have to build a bloc. And this issue of bloc not being separated, this issue of bloc that Professor Vali has underlined also for the Rojalat, is absolutely crucial for the Rojava. But for the second question, I think that Professor Vali will be able to.
I think in relation to your question that why they should repeat the example of Rojava, insofar as I know, most of the Kurdish political parties, political forces, and at least there are 7 of them now. 6 of them, which are they're all, if you like, proclaim a form of autonomy, either within a federal structure or in a different way. So whether there is going to take the form of Rojava or not, they want to regulate their relationship with the center on the basis of some sort of autonomy arrangement. As to other communities in Iran, I am not quite sure. I mean, I know Baluchis and the Arabs have similar intentions, or let's say similar plans, but I'm not at all sure about Azeri community, which is the largest national ethnic community. In certain ways, I see that I would say the position, let's say attitude, position of some form of pan-Turkism has taken root there. And we can see that in various occasions, like football matches, other occasions, or in confrontation in the town of Urmia with the Kurds and so on. I don't see that sector of Turkish community would be very much open to have a kind of autonomy arrangement inside a wider structure. But I think if the situation comes to let's say, talking about a general arrangement inside Iran, I think the other communities, in particularly Baluchi and Arab and Turkmen, which are already inside, they have an democratic organization of the communities in Iran. That they have that. In fact, I spoke in their conference a couple of months ago, and in Stockholm, and they have that. There is a base for that, but whether or not all of them will join in, I'm not quite sure about that. I don't have that information, but at the moment what I can say that the cause for concern is Turkish Azeri community, and with kind of ultra-nationalist, pan-Turkish attitude towards politics, partly charged with their, I would say, emotional affiliation with northern Azerbaijan, Azerbaijan Republic, and partly with the state of Turkey, and partly because of their opposition with the Kurdish community in which they are mixed or they are neighbors. So this is the cause for concern. I think the chances of a countrywide coalition with, if you like, national communities, non-Persian national communities or ethnic communities at the moment is not very strong. Although most of them can come together in the context of a federal arrangement, I think that is good. But whether or not there is a good chance for federalism in Iran, that's a very different issue.
Thank you so much. There are 3 more questions. Please, if you, just wrap it up. The first one is, right now, Iran is going through a touch time. If the government decides to give some rights to the Kurdish people, the question is whether the Kurds should accept these rights or refuse them. And and then this one, if you could explain it. There hasn't been mention for whom, but whoever you.
Are you addressing
I think
me?
so, yeah. But as it's about Iran and Rojava, yes, please.
Could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. The question is, right now Iran is going through a tough time. If the government decides to give some rights to the Kurdish people, the question is whether the Kurds should accept these rights or refuse them. Could you please explain it in like 2 minutes?
Yes, but you see, these rights they have to be. I don't know what they are and how much of rights we are talking about. What rights we're talking at the moment? We see, for instance, if you look at the Constitution of the Islamic Republic in clause 15 and clause 19, they're talking about what they call local languages and education with local languages and so on. But this is always been there in terms of in the constitutional terms, but they have never been realized because politics of the state has not allowed for their realization. So my fear is that if similar rights offered to similar privileges or rights are offered to the Kurds or other communities, and they are simply stated legally in a legal document, but not then allowed to be, realized in practice, then I would say we are doing, what is in political theory called, exclusion by inclusion. You are excluding one community and its rights by including it legally, but suppressing it politically. Now, if that is the case, I don't think that's going to get much, very far. That's not going to be. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, as we have just 1 minute's time, we can't go through the next two questions, but I'm afraid of being disconnected. So thank you for being here. Thank you. I really appreciate our guest speakers and the audience being here. Stay in touch with us. We'll have more panels on Kurdish question.
Thank you very much.
That was a very great
Thank
pleasure.
you and the audience. Yes, thank you.
And greetings, Kek Abbas.
Greetings to you and look forward to meeting you in Paris.
That will be lovely. Thank you, Aso.
Thank you. Bye.